relatively small ships, the small coastal end of the market, only a couple of thousand deadweight tons. So it's not like they're super tankers or extremely large container ships. They're less on the radar screens of the authorities for that reason, I guess.
How is it meant to work? Is the system meant to be regulated?
As far as I'm aware, there are no controls on actual sale and purchase of ships.
You don't need to register it, or
to sail a ship, yes, you obviously need to register it with what is known as a flag state. Now you'll notice the flag states of these two vessels. One was Moldova, one was Sierra Leone. These are flag states that, to put it politely, might have a softer regulatory touch than some of the other registers in the world.
That's a very, very polite way of putting it. And so what it means is that you could probably use a false name or something like that and get your ship registered?
No need to use a false name, of course. For a few $100s, you can set up a brass plate company in one of the many accommodating offshore no-tax jurisdictions. Nobody's going to ask too many questions, and you have a legal entity to register the ship to.
This is presenting the European Union with a major policy issue. Is it going to be possible for the EU to control this better?
It's very difficult to think of a way, as the speaker from Frontex said. It's not actually a problem for the shipping industry or the EU as such. The problem is the terrible situation in some of these countries. I mean, I did hear today that 3,000 people died as a result of people smuggling in the Mediterranean last year, but when you set that against the 76,000 that died because of the Syria conflict, or the 16,000 then that died in Iraq, you can understand why people might want to take their chances.
Why the migrants might?
Yeah, why the migrants might do it, and why the criminals, because that's what they are, will facilitate that for the huge profit margin that they can make.
You write about the shipping industry. You monitor the shipping industry.
That's right, yeah.
Is the industry bothered by this? I mean, are they active on this? Or does it just think there's nothing they can do?
Well, these are not commercial ship owners. They are criminals, aren't they? I mean, frankly, the European Union can pass what legislation it likes. The International Maritime Organization can pass what regulations it likes. That's not going to deter anybody whose single motivation is the money. Full stop. Right. They're going to keep on doing it, and they'll break any laws that are made.
So you too are saying, like the Frontex person, this is a very difficult problem to resolve. Thank you very much for coming in. That was David Osler, finance editor from Lloyd's List. President Obama has led tribute to the veteran US politician Mario Cuomo, who's died at the age of 82. He was a very prominent figure, flirted with presidential runs, but never did it. A lifelong advocate against the death penalty and credited with blocking its reinstatement in New York State. And he was a famously good speaker.
And I will faithfully perform the duties of the office
of Governor of the State of New York.
Of Governor of the State of New York.
So help me God.
So help me God. Like millions of others, my mother and father came here with very little more than a willingness to spend all their effort in honest toil. They asked only for the opportunity to work and live in dignity, and see one of their children go from behind their little grocery store in South Jamaica, where he was born, to the highest seat in the greatest state, in the greatest nation. 10 days ago, President Reagan admitted that although some people in this country seem to be doing well nowadays, others were unhappy, even worried about themselves, their families, and their futures. The president said that he didn't understand that fear. He said, "Why, this country is a shining city on a hill." There is despair, Mr. President, in the faces that you don't see, in the places that you don't visit, in your shining city. Mr. President, you ought to know that this nation is more a tale of two cities than it is just a shining city on a hill.
There is no intelligent reason for the death penalty. It's the Bible. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's the old idea of getting even. It's vengeance, but it's not intelligence, and it doesn't deter. and it doesn't help. And it's never saved a life, but it has taken innocent lives over and over.
There we are, some of the words of Mario Cuomo, who's died today in the United States at the age of 82. And perhaps it says something about political dynasties in the United States that his death was announced just hours after his son, Andrew, was inaugurated for his second term as New York governor. You're listening to the World Service of the BBC. Coming up on the programme, China cracks down on militant Islam. But for our reporter in the western province of Xinjiang, telling the story proves quite tricky.
We're only 2 miles from the village of a family of suicide attackers. But the police are not going to let us get any closer to the heart of this story.
So he says it's a place that's closed to foreigners. I don't think it is. Yeah. What now? We're just trying to do our legal job as journalists. There is no law that is broken. They've effectively detained us here for more than an hour, not letting us get to our destination.
Carrie Gracie up against it in Xinjiang. More from her later. The headlines just now: Italian Coast Guards have taken control of another migrant ship abandoned by its crew in what appears to be a new method of smuggling people into Europe. And the head of the UN Ebola mission, who's stepping down, says efforts to tackle the outbreak have not even come close to ending it. You're listening to NewsHour. Turner Prize-winning artist Grayson Perry has turned his attention to portraiture and British identity for his latest new works entitled Who Are You? The 14 portraits of individuals, families and groups, which include a politician, a young female-to-male transsexual, Northern Ireland loyalist marchers and an X-Factor contestant, are now on show at London's National Portrait Gallery. And Rebecca Kesby took a tour of the exhibition with Grayson Perry as her guide. The exhibition begins with his portrait of Britain, a huge tapestry entitled Comfort Blanket.
I call it Comfort Blanket because I started with the idea that British nationality is like a kind of enormous comfort blanket you can wrap yourself up in. If I describe the tapestry, it's like a huge sort of patchwork, really. And there's a large portrait of the Queen looking like your grandma.
Well, it's 1/3 of the piece, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of loosely based on a piece of money. The idea that you're sort of wrapping yourself up in a big, cuddly £5 note, really.
Very colourful.
Humour, of course, is incredibly important to the British character. So in the middle of the tapestry is a kind of embodiment of the British citizen with the kind of perhaps the emotional legacy of being a British person, in that his biggest organ is his fear of embarrassment. So he has many good things, like a sort of polite egalitarianism and courtesy, but he also is imbued with hypocrisy and cynicism.
Now this one looks like it might have been a bit of a challenge. You went to meet some Ulster Unionists in Northern Ireland.
Or loyalists, as they prefer to call them.
Loyalists. And they have a very distinctive sense of identity. What did you find when you went there?
Well, you know, one of the aspects of identity that I was interested in is sort of the national identity. And, of course, nobody is more British than the Ulster Loyalists. You know, I went to Ulster, Belfast, and there's a lot of murals, and they're very dour, very aggressive. You know, a lot of guns, slightly intimidating. Well, not slightly intimidating, very intimidating.
Well, they're designed to be, aren't they?
Yeah. So I wanted to make something that was quite friendly, you know, and jolly, and maybe feminine as well. And so I've sort of done them all riding a big blue horse. But the horse is looking a little bit knackered. Because I think their idea of Britain is a bit knackered in some ways. In a way, that's what they're kind of loyal to, is a kind of maybe a rather old-fashioned idea of what Britain is.
And it's all pink, and there's some sparkly sort of sequiny things.
Yes,
You've got a rifle.
Quite camp.
It's really camp. You've got a rifle here with
pink and purple sequin rifle.
One thing that struck me about watching the TV programme was the response that you got from your subjects when they then saw the works that you'd done. Were you a bit nervous about showing this one to the Unionists? Because, I mean, it is a completely different image of them to one that they may want.
I thought hard about how I would do it, you know, and how I would say something, you know, pertinent to them without it being offensive. And, you know, there was one man who looked at it for a while and he said, yeah, it looks a bit like a pantomime poster. And then he sort of thought about it a while and he thought, maybe that's what it is, you know. And I thought that was a beautiful moment, really.
Did they think you were laughing at them? And as an artist, do you feel under any sort of pressure from the subject of the portrait?
Yeah, I mean, it's just whatever they do, they're going to take it personally. Yeah. We joked when I was in Belfast, I said, yeah, I'm going to do you as happy loyalist, you know, and that seemed like an oxymoron, because they always seem to be up in arms about something.
If you can hear some sort of chuckles in the background, that's because Grayson is a bit of a star in Britain and is being followed through the gallery by numerous fans who are trying to shake his hand constantly.
You take it for granted, our identity, until it's challenged. Then you suddenly realise that your actually quite fragile sense of self can be under threat. If you live in a homogenous culture, you never realise that what you have is distinct and a pride. I mean, that's why I was interested in talking to a white middle-class man, because being a very dominant group, their identity is very rarely challenged.
And you did do that.
Yes, we go on to
why don't we? Because the man you chose for that is also quite well known in Britain. He's let's say, a disgraced politician. He was jailed for mild corruption. His name was Chris Hume. It still is. You tried to find some cracks in the character, didn't you?
Well, he's a great example of the white middle-class man in that he kind of exuded confidence, and what I found was that he was fairly impregnable. So I ended up really making a portrait about defensiveness. And so I've made a large vase. It's in a classical Chinese shape in a kind of celadon grey-green colour. And it's impressed and inlaid with bands of repeat patterns that show the Chris Hume story. And I used the repeat motif because he very much would insist he was an individual. But of course he's the part of that tribe, the white middle-class man tribe. And so I've done it as a repeat pattern. And so you've got the Liberal Democrat Party logo, but then the central motif is his personalised number plate, because he was caught for speeding and he tried to get his wife to take the points for it. So
that's what led to his downfall and his ultimate jail.
Well, what led to his downfall actually was the motif underneath, which is a penis, because he had an affair, so his wife shocked him. And there's a little jail cell window as well to sort of show that. As a metaphor for vulnerability, of course, you couldn't do better than a pot. And so what I did, I smashed it. And then I had it restored in the traditional Oriental technique with the gold lacquer, because vulnerability is very attractive in a person. It's a way in for people to identify with, because if you don't show vulnerability, your relationships suffer. And so one of the most beautiful elements of the pot is the very fact that it's vulnerable. It's smashed.
Yeah. It's also empty.
Yes, this analogy could go on and on.
Now, in direct contrast to the Chris Hume lack of vulnerability, this person that you interviewed in the programme did the exact opposite and let you really into some very personal parts.
Delightful, artistic, well, I call him a man now because he started life as a girl, a young black girl in South London who never felt love, and when he was young was obsessed with Peter Pan. Peter Pan, of course, is this sort of androgynous, sort of slippery character who never grows up, so is always sort of prepubescently. Very pertinent symbol for someone who is kind of ambiguous about their own gender. And so I sort of latched onto that, and then I went to see the statue of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, which is a sort of bronze Art Nouveau thing with him standing atop blowing a horn. And I thought, that's another great symbol, another gift, because identity only really works when you're kind of hailed as having that identity. People in the street say, oh, there goes a so-and-so, and that means that it's working. Now, of course, if you're going to change gender, you want to be at a point where people in the street say, there's a man, and not a woman, not someone pretending to be a man.
You're recognised for what you want to be.
Exactly. And so he's kind of blowing his horn and he's saying, I am a man, and he's got his top off to show that he is a man.
So what do you think this exhibition and your work brings to this?
The overall message I want to say is that we are all each other. You can't say I am an individual. We are a community, and these people are part of that. And I'm very proud that I'm sort of representing groups, perhaps not famous people, amongst all these celebrated historical, mainly white, mainly male figures.
Grayson Perry, thank you very much indeed.
Grayson Perry there with Rebecca Kesby, and apparently a sort of band of followers as they went round the museum there and gathered a crowd as they moved along. Now then, coming up in the second half of the programme, we'll look at one of the most controversial proposals to change Kenya's constitution since the country became independent. That's not the proposal, that's the noise that the proposal caused in Parliament when the Speaker of the Kenyan Parliament tried to regain control. MPs were trading blows over new security laws, which were pushed through in mid-December and have now gone to court.
Documentary on the BBC World Service.
Traveling with a violin of that ilk is like traveling with a small child.
The startling 300-year journey of a Stradivarius violin.
This isn't a violin. This is a multi-million-dollar musical instrument. This is the crime of the century.
Passed down by geniuses, dictators, refugees, and regular people.
Everybody was freaking out about the violin.
The whole thing was just like, what? You know, I mean, those guys took your violin and shot you. It was none of, you know, it was just unbelievable. I would drive myself crazy if every time I played the Devil's Choice Sonata, I thought about continuing playing that piece on this violin.
Peter Curran presents The Lipinski on the BBC World Service.
So here it is.
Online, bbcworldservice.com/documentary.
Coming up on NewsHour over the next 30 minutes, civil liberties and security. The debate moves to Kenya. And as the new year begins, we assess the progress that's been made and the progress yet to be made in the international effort to contain the Ebola epidemic. What will 2015 bring? But now let's have a summary of the latest news.
BBC News with Stuart McIntosh. The Italian Coast Guard has taken control of a ship carrying more than 400 migrants that was abandoned by its crew, the second such incident in Italian waters this week. The spokesman for the International Organization for Migration said people traffickers were using a new route to get to Europe from Turkey, abandoning migrants in open waters. The outgoing head of the United Nations Ebola mission says the global response to the outbreak in West Africa has not come anywhere close to ending the current crisis. Speaking in Ghana, Tony Banbury said the world was engaged in an epic battle against the disease and there was a long way to go before it was eradicated. More bodies have been found in the Java Sea off Indonesia by teams searching for the wreckage of an Air Asia plane. The US Navy ship has joined the hunt for the fuselage, where it's believed most of the dead are located. The plane had 162 people on board when it came down on Sunday. The Chief Minister of India's largest state, Uttar Pradesh, has suspended 2 policemen accused of raping a 14-year-old girl inside a police station. Its mother said she was abducted on Wednesday as she left her home. Reports from Libya say a huge fire at a major oil storage site has been put out. The blaze, yesterday, Libya's biggest oil port, was sparked by a rocket during fighting a week ago. Apple is facing a lawsuit for not telling users about the amount of memory required by its operating system. The lawsuit, filed in California, alleges the system, iOS 8, takes up so much space on iPods, iPhones and iPads that far less than advertised is left for people to store their own data. Steven Gerrard, the captain of the English Premier League football team Liverpool, has announced that he'll leave the club at the end of the season. Gerrard, who's 34, has spent his entire career with Liverpool. And that's the latest world news.
Coming up, Kenya's courts take a stand, but first our daily look at the world of business. And revenues from gambling in Macau near Hong Kong are down. It's not happened before. It's been a growth sector, as the Macau Galaxy Hotel showed when it was launched in 2011.
I wish for my own kingdom. I wish for good fortune. I wish for the most luxurious surroundings. Make all your wishes come true. Galaxy Macau, the new palace of Asia.
There you go, flogging gambling, but it doesn't seem to be working. As I say, revenues are down. Kate O'Keefe is a Wall Street Journal reporter in Hong Kong. So, first of all, her assessment. How bad are the figures?
They're pretty bad. In December, the 30% fall in gambling revenue was the worst ever recorded since numbers started being published in 2002. And 2014 was the first year that Macau ever had a full year decline in gambling revenue.
So, what's going on?
Well, the biggest factor people are pointing to is China's corruption crackdown. This is a China-wide initiative that has taken out a bunch of top leaders across mainland China, but has also affected Macau quite acutely because a lot of high rollers are now afraid to be seen gambling huge sums at the baccarat tables in Macau.
Have you been down to see these casinos?
Oh yes, I go there all the time. Hong Kong's just an hour ferry from Macau, so I pop by a couple of times per month.
Really? And how big are the gambles? How much do you think?
The bets can really be huge. I mean, a lot of tables you won't even be able to place a bet for less than around $50 US, which is quite large.
Yeah.
But the real slowdown in gambling is taking place in these VIP rooms, which are where the biggest gamblers are, but they're also private areas. So you as a kind of normal person wandering about wouldn't really be privy to that.
Well, I did wonder about that when you gave that explanation that some of these big officials don't want to be seen there, because I presume there is a very discreet service on offer for those who don't want much publicity.
That's right, but China can keep pretty close tabs on people when it wants to.
Right, so they'd know. The state would know.
Right.
Yeah, and so any other factors at play? Is there just people with less money to spend on this, or other elements here?
Well, there are a lot of other elements, that's right. I mean, China's economy has been slowing for some time. There's also been some other policies that have been unfavorable to gambling in Macau, like tighter rules regarding smoking in casinos, also tighter restrictions on visas for Chinese traveling to Macau. There's also more oversight on a card called Union Pay, which a lot of sort of mass market gamblers would use to access cash in Macau, because, as you know, China has capital restrictions, so it's not so easy to actually bring out a ton of money from the mainland to gamble.
And that was Kate O'Keefe on the casino's run of luck, perhaps running out. You're listening to the World Service of the BBC. This is Owen Bennett-Jones. And you're listening to NewsHour. Now, ever since 9/11, there's been a debate about the appropriate response, about the tension between security and civil liberties. And broadly, some say governments always want more power, and they play on people's fears, especially Others argue that the innocent have nothing to worry about, and the state needs information to keep people safe. It's been discussed in the UK, the US, Australia, Pakistan, most recently Kenya, where the High Court has just suspended parts of some measures signed into law a couple of weeks ago by the President. The courts say objections raised by the opposition and human rights groups over the constitutionality of the measures will have to be settled in a full hearing later. So this is just a suspension at this stage. One of the measures involved, to give an example, said the government would be able to hold someone in custody, a suspect, for up to 360 days. Well, Mwenda Njoka is Interior Ministry spokesman. What's his reaction to today's ruling?
You know, when you go to court, either you lose or you win. So the government is going to appeal the ruling.
What about the substance of the issues? Many people around the world will, I think, raise an eyebrow at the idea that your government wants to hold people for a year without, they could hold suspects for a year?
It's not like there's anything particularly different from what is happening now in the world.
Sorry, so you think that the government should be able to hold people for a year?
They're quite against stories. There are certain things that have to be done in a way that is different. So there is not conventional war. So the country should be held for a long time to be able to enable the intelligence and the security agencies to be able to put together cases, to put together information and evidence so they can be charged. It's not anything special in Kenya, because it has been happening in other parts of the world. So like in the US, there is Guantanamo Bay, where they are holding suspects for very long periods of time.
Well, that's true, but Guantanamo Bay has been the subject of enormous international criticism. You wouldn't expect Kenya to be excused from such criticism, would you?
No, of course not. We don't want to hold people illegally. So we want them to do everything in conformity with the law. And the reason why we wanted to hold them for a longer period was because, from experience, we realized that sometimes if you rush people to court, you are not supposed to convict them, and yet there is evidence. So we needed a bit more time to be able to hold them as we gather information, as we gather evidence, and be able to charge them so that we can get a conviction. It's part of the strategic fight.
You know, the question is whether it's the rule of law, isn't it? I mean, would you like Kenya to have a new constitution to facilitate this kind of government power?
What has happened is that we have a new constitution that puts a lot of emphasis on civil liberties, almost to the extent that our agencies are not able to work as they should. So what we're trying to balance is to balance between civil liberties and also the rule of law, and the laws are meant to be changed, to be amended, depending on the circumstances of the moment.
And that was Mwenda Njoka giving the point of view of the Interior Ministry in Kenya. Let's get another view now from Lempa Suyanka, an advocate at the Kenyan High Court. He's a member of an NGO which has basically been set up to monitor the implementation of Kenya's constitution. And he was actually in court arguing the case against some of these new government laws, so he had some success. So I asked him if, of the measures that have been suspended, because some were suspended and some weren't, of those which were suspended, which ones does he think are the most important?
The most important are the ones that were actually posing a threat to the Constitution, especially to the right to fair trial, which is an absolute right under the Bill of Rights, Article 50 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. There was also the one that was posing a great danger to the freedom of expression and the media operation, that intended to impose very hefty fines of about 5 million shillings. It's a substantial amount of money. There was also the one that intended to limit the number of refugees in Kenya to 150. And the judge found that to be posing a very great and imminent danger.
Okay, so I should just explain, when you say 150, that figure is actually 150,000 refugees that the government was trying to get a cap on that. So tell us, which of the powers that the court let go through are, to your mind, the biggest problem?
The powers that the court allowed to go through is, for example, that of cancelling an identity card for someone who is suspected not to be a national of this country. But the court in general allowed those particular laws that allowed the rules of natural justice to apply before they are applied against any arrested person.
Now then, as you say, this is going to go to court. This is only a suspension pending a full hearing. How long might that take, and what are you expecting?
The Chief Justice has to empanel a bench of about 3 to 5 or an even number of judges. We expect a very tough argument from both sides. So in terms of duration, we expect that by the end of March, this matter should have come to a conclusion.
And what do you make of the court? I mean, this is quite a big moment, wasn't it? Has the court taken a significant stand? Are you surprised that the court has taken a stand?
Actually, it's not by surprise, because the new constitution of Kenya 2010, which was passed through a referendum, created independent institutions and actually created a judiciary that is well supported by the constitution and by the people of Kenya, in that the judge made very good pronunciation on the powers of the people, the power of the people, and the court being the last frontier of justice and the rule of law. It would appear as a surprise to most people, but reading the law and its spirit, what the court did actually was only to apply the letter and the spirit of the Constitution.
Yeah, the Constitution seems to be working.
The Constitution has created autonomous institutions. Probably we are headed to a situation where institution will be working, and that's what the civil society and all citizens are looking for, whereby institutions created by the Constitution are respected and they are doing their work so that they can serve the people of Kenya.
And it's also what the Katiba Institute is looking for, and that is Lempa Soyinka, who is from that non-governmental organisation in Kenya. Now, China says it's facing a growing threat from militant Islam. It's in the midst of a year-long crackdown, especially in the western province of Xinjiang, home to China's Uyghurs. Despite doubling the policing budget in the province and jailing hundreds of people, violent attacks have continued. Now, reporting, as you can imagine, from Xinjiang isn't easy, as our China editor Carrie Gracie has been finding out.
Shut down.
Xinjiang, a legendary landscape of snowy mountains and desert, 2,000 miles west of Beijing. 2 flights, 6 hours in the air. Somewhere beyond the mountains is our destination. It's the last major city before the Pakistan border. It's an ancient Silk Road. It's the own version of the Wild West. In recent years, this region has become notorious in China as the source of a terror problem which has spilled out to endanger Chinese citizens across the country. China says its problem is global jihad, that young Uyghur men are being poisoned by the propaganda of militant Islam coming over the border from Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
The meaning is Allah bless you.
A guide shows me round Kashgar's old city, a warren of lanes, mosques, artisans' workshops and courtyard homes.
It's a beautiful view of the old city.
Oh yeah, it's big.
Very big, yeah. Many houses very dangerous, so for safety the Uyghur people turn down the old house and build new house.
It's striking that the people rebuilding this ancient city are not the local Uyghurs, so desperately in need of jobs, but labourers brought in from elsewhere in China. Economic marginalisation has created resentment. But I can't ask my guide about this, because airing grievances is dangerous for any Uyghur citizen.
Well, I just came through security at the bus station, and it's quite marked how they're checking Uyghur men. We walk through without being challenged at all, despite setting off all kinds of beeps. And the women are walking through, but it's the men that they're checking in with great care.
You need sharp elbows at this ticket counter. I'm trying to head south to the area where a lot of Chinese violence is taking place. The authorities fear religion is breeding terror. They ban beard, veils, and they confiscate many religious books and DVDs. I want to talk to friends and neighbours of some of the attackers and understand what turned them into vengeful murderers and martyrs. An hour out of Kashgar and we're stopped at a police checkpoint.
So they're complaining they've got to check a paperwork and they don't want you to take any pictures and they're getting a bit tense about... Yeah, we're British.
We're only 2 miles from the village of a family of suicide attackers, but the police are not going to let us get any closer to the heart of this story.
So he says it's a place that's closed to foreigners. What now? We're just trying to do our legal job as journalists. There is no law that we've broken. They've effectively detained us here for more than an hour, not letting us get to our destination.
So begins our 2,000-mile trek back to Beijing. But for Uyghurs, freedom of movement is shrinking, along with freedom of religion. Without any legitimate space in which to voice their grievances, the grim probability is that the violence will go on.
Now it's Carrie Gracie. Steven Gerrard, the captain of the English Premier League football team Liverpool, has announced he's going to leave the club at the end of the season. He's 34 and he spent his entire career with Liverpool. He actually joined its youth scheme at the age of 8.
Now then this is interesting because young Steven Gerrard is going to come on to make his debut for Liverpool, a local lad born in Huyton, an England under-18 international, plays in midfield normally.
Now let it Johansson lifts the trophy, shows it to the Liverpool players. Gerrard says, that's mine. And at 1:45 this Thursday morning in Istanbul, Liverpool are champions of Europe.
45 minutes have been played, 4 minutes of stoppage time. Risa crosses high towards Kromkamp, headed down, runs to Gerrard. Gerrard lets it in shot. Fantastic goal by Steven Gerrard. Miracle man brings Liverpool level. What a strike!
Oh, Steven Gerrard has slipped here. Dembaba's got the ball, and he's 1-on-1, and he's scored! Chelsea have taken the lead after an awful slip by, of all people, Steven Gerrard.
The great moments and the despairing ones. Liverpool fans, though, have very mixed feelings about the player's decision.
Devastated, to be honest. I mean, it's been waiting for a long time. We all knew he was going to happen, but we were just hoping he'd last a bit longer.
It's sad, but he's not getting a game no more, is he? He's getting a bit too old, so not fair play to him. Served the club well.
Put him on the side, it's horrible to say, but I think he's slowing the team down, so it will be a good move for him to go. Like, he's not just another player, he's Steven Gerrard at the end of the day, you know what I mean? He's our hero, but if that's what the man wants, and he feels that he needs to go abroad and he wants to have something different, then I think all the Liverpool fans will be around him on that.
Apparently he's off to play a year or two, I guess, before finally hanging up his boots.
Coming up later here on the BBC World Service, our history programme, Witness. In 1919, nearly 200 sailors returning home at the end of the First World War were drowned just metres from home off the west coast of Scotland.
It was a beautiful morning after the terrible stormy and dark night, and lying on the shore were the bodies of the sailors that were washed ashore.
I'm Claire Bowes, and I've been listening to BBC Archive of witnesses to the wrecking of the SS Isle Air off the Isle of Lewis.
The man in the next house, how he got ashore, I don't know. But he was like a man out of his mind. And he had two words. He had two words that he said on.
That's in Witness, and if you missed the programme on air, you can find it online at bbcworldservice.com/witness.
A reminder of today's main news now. Italian Coast Guards have taken control of another migrant cargo ship abandoned by its crew in what appears to be a new method of smuggling people into Europe. David Osler from Lloyd's List told NewsHour it would be hard to prevent the smugglers getting hold of more ships.
These are not commercial ship owners, they are criminals. I mean, frankly, the European Union can pass what legislation it likes. The International Maritime Organization can pass what regulations it likes.